Hi, I'm Pete Riley, contributor to Forbes.com, where I write about taxes, and I'm here with Green Party candidate Dr. Jill Stein. Thank you for coming, Dr. Stein, and coming for this interview.
It's great to be with you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start right in on taxes. President Obama has released 12 years of returns, Governor Romney 2 years, and a letter from Price Waterhouse summarizing 20 years of returns. And I haven't seen your returns yet.
Thank you for asking. I actually have released returns in the past on previous campaigns, and I'm actually in the process of preparing the returns to release for this campaign as well. So you should see them soon, very soon.
How many years?
2, 4, something like that.
I'm just wondering, because
Yeah.
President Obama did 12.
Yeah.
So are we going to match that, or is it going to be a little less?
Yeah. Let me talk to my husband, see if I can twist his arm.
Okay, well, I had all sorts of speculations about what might be in them, but I'm going to now just wait until I see him to make any comments. Because actually, it relates to another question. I'd really like to know more about you. When I read your bios, it's like you graduated from Harvard in 1973, and that's when your life began almost. I know that you grew up in Highland Park, Illinois, where Michael Jordan has his $29 million mansion, and your family must have valued education very highly. You're a physician, you have a brother who's a physician, and 2 sisters with PhDs.
That's right.
I noted that your father, Joseph Stein, he passed away in 2004. He was, services were at the North Shore Congregation Israel. Is that kind of the temple you grew up in?
That's right. I went to Sunday school every day.
Bat mitzvah?
I was not bat mitzvah. I was confirmed.
You were confirmed.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what intrigues me is Reform Judaism has a great social justice impulse into it. Is that one of the big influences in your life?
Huge, yes. I grew up, as I say, going to Sunday school weekly for, 10 years, I think, and really had sort of the values of the Old Testament, the Golden Rule, really very much drummed into my upbringing. And my parents were of the generation, the Holocaust generation, really. So I heard from my mother in particular about the importance of taking social responsibility and the importance of speaking up when you see things going on in your community that aren't right. It's absolutely critical. It's of paramount importance to stand up. So yeah, I mean, my family was, very attuned to the civil rights struggle as well, and that was really the milieu that I grew up in.
Are you still active in the temple?
I'm not. When my mother passed away 2 years ago, that was sort of where my relationship with organized Judaism had stayed center, and I used to go to high holiday services with her and my father when he was alive. I am in a mixed family right now, which is predominantly agnostic, I must say, and we're a little bit ecumenical. I have a lot of respect for many religions and spiritual traditions, I would say. I feel I'm very much culturally Jewish. I was raised Jewish, though I'm not actively a practicing Jew.
I see. So I might run into a Unitarian Universalist congregation sometime? Over in Concord next door? Or?
Well, I'm generally not participating in organized services of any variety at this point, but I certainly show up at congregations of all colors and flavors.
I'm particularly interested in the Green Party's platform as it relates to taxes, so I have some very specific questions. One of the first is on carried interest, and which Governor Romney certainly has taken advantage of that, as we all know. It allows people to convert service income into capital gain, which is objected to by some. Your party is against it, but my question would be is, if you eliminated the preferential rate for capital gain, it would seem that would be moot. Do you still think there should be a preferential rate for capital gains?
No, I do not. We support taxing capital gains as income. We think that people who are earning half or 1/10 as their bosses, ought to know that their bosses who are rolling in dough are making a comparable contribution in terms of the proportion. So we think it's only basic fairness.
So why do you have a thing in your platform about carried interest then? If the capital gains rate would make it irrelevant, do you need better tax
Maybe we just
counsel back there?
Yeah,
or?
well, yeah. I mean, maybe we need to put you to work so that we can do a more refined edit of our tax policy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll have to get your number when you're done.
Wealth tax. You're proposing a wealth tax of 0.5% or 50 basis points, as we might say.
Now, let me just ask you, I'm sorry, are you talking about the Green Party platform?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
Just to clarify. Okay.
I'm sticking you with the whole Green Party
All
platform,
right,
regardless
okay.
of what you're. That's all I have to go in.
Yes.
But it's a 0.5% wealth tax.
Mm-hmm.
I could see how that might work with marketable securities and real estate, but when you get into things like rare artwork or precious metals or
Sure.
brands and that type of stuff. I mean, are we going to need an army of wealth inspectors in order to figure this thing out? How could it possibly work?
Yeah, well, let me just explain that there is a distinction between the Green Party platform, which is full of good ideas and visionary statements, and a political campaign, which is where you double down and you focus in on what's actually doable and what's doable now. And I will say that, I find a wealth tax interesting, especially an intangible wealth tax, where you're talking about stocks and bonds. So you have specific, record of exactly what you're going to tax, because otherwise it does become difficult. But I think there's a lot to be said for a wealth tax, and especially a concrete wealth tax where you know what you're talking about. Now, that said, we have not prioritized that as a part of our tax reforms within the Green New Deal. But I think down the line, this would be a very interesting discussion. Part of the reason we haven't gone there is, it's really important to start where the public is and where the public conversation is. And we hear a lot of debate about capital gains, taxing them as income, about a progressive income tax and returning to the rates of, Eisenhower or even Clinton for that matter, where there was certainly no price paid and the economy did very well, much better than it's done with those rates being cut.
I'm still going to hold you to your platform. I went on the web, I looked up your platform, I studied it. There's some exciting things in there.
That's great.
And so I'm going to keep asking you about them.
That's wonderful.
The next one being community ground rent land value taxation. If you don't mind me quoting here, that
Sure.
distinguishes between the socially and privately created wealth of land by increasing the taxes on land as undeveloped and lowering the tax on improvements. The idea goes back to Henry George's Progress and Poverty, published in the 1870s, in which he said, "We must make land common property." Now, it seems to me that might encourage people to overdevelop land, to not leave it
Right.
fallow, so to speak. It creates a pressure to that, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That would be a real liability of a blanket land tax. It would be very important, I think, to prioritize development within urban centers and to protect undeveloped land outside of urban centers. Absolutely.
I think though the root you recognize the roots in Henry George, right? Or is that with we must make land common property? Are you heading in that direction with the Green Party? Because people are very attached to owning land.
Yes. I mean, this is not a proposal that we have brought into discussion. And, party platforms are full of, as I said, good, forward-thinking ideas, but you really have to sort what you actually want to do from the totality of the platform. And to tell you the truth, I can't say that I am familiar with all the details of the Green Party platform. I'm going to have to consult you, since you have actually done a really careful reading of it. For future reference.
Well, the next one is this is a tough one because Americans, like many Americans, feel very strongly about owning land. They're very attached. It's a great attachment. The only thing that might be higher is their cars. And you're proposing to establish a system of carbon taxes on fossil fuels to begin to reflect the real environmental cost of their extraction and use. So is a vote for Jill Stein a vote for higher prices at the pump?
Put it this way. It's really important that we have affordable transportation. And it's also really important that we have transportation that's not going to kill us. So we need to begin to prioritize energy efficient transportation, and that can include automobiles that are very carbon efficient, very fuel efficient, and we can go far beyond what the president called for. We can also provide public transit options, including high-speed rail and light rail in our cities and so on. We need a variety of transit options. And I think the question here is not an either or. Like either you have your gas guzzler with gasoline at current rates, or you have, and with that climate change that's rapidly taking us over the cliff, or you have, you put your automobiles out of business overnight and you raise taxes of, for transportation. The point is that we can create the transportation system we want, and we're calling for public transportation to provide options so that people have choices. We want to see improved efficiency in our automobiles. We want to see consumers not have to subsidize the impacts, the full cost accounting of a fossil fuel-based transportation system, and we pay that price in all kinds of ways. So we need a transition that's not going to burden everyday people to be paying the price here.
So will gas prices be higher if your program goes into effect, or will they not?
Well, put it this way, we want to be sure that consumers are not paying the price for a livable energy system. So one of the ways to do that is through what's called a fee and rebate system. It's a kind of a carbon tax, although actually it's revenue neutral. So if the price goes up for the fossil fuels, the consumer gets the rebate. So that it's basically a zero-sum game. It puts money in the consumer's pocket so that you can decide how you're going to use your money. Do you want to keep using that money to buy gas-guzzling automobiles, or do you want to use it to buy fossil fuel-efficient automobiles?
So what you're saying is Jonathan takes the train into Boston, and I drive in. So I should be paying more for gas, and Jonathan will get a check?
I can't say that the details are completely worked out. I think you would both get the check. You both get the check, and the check would be, proportionate to income, something like that, so that everybody's paying the fee for their fossil fuel use, and everybody's getting the rebate and deciding how you want to use that rebate. If you want to keep using your fossil fuels and use the rebate to pay the cost, you do that. But if you want to transition your habits so that you're using more public transportation or getting a more fuel-efficient car, you have the option to do that, because this creates an incentive to move in the right direction.
So are you saying the people who live in the western part of the country, where you enter the directions to the restaurant, you get on the highway, and it says to stay on the highway for the next 150 miles, should be paying more, and those of us who live in more dense areas will be getting checks?
This is why we're not just calling for one measure. This is why we're calling for public transportation systems. And why we're calling for a Green New Deal that would actually jumpstart the creation of those systems. We have an economic emergency right now, and we have a climate emergency, and we can solve them both together by creating jobs to do things like build those public transit systems where we don't have them.
Your party's green tax shift, carbon taxes, and green economy platforms are excellent goals and deep responses to the role of climate change in creating more poverty, strife, and starvation at a lightning pace. Given that your MO is not to accept corporate donations and to be generally anti-big corporation, what is your feeling as to the importance of global standards for corporate sustainability, such as the Global Reporting Initiative, which is an attempt to introduce some of the same principles that we as tax accountants use to measure money to the world of sustainability reporting?
It's a great idea, and it's a good first step, but we've generally not found that reporting alone does the job. And if the power is still in the hands of the economic elite to define political policy, there will be more loopholes created. So, it's a good step. I'd say, sure, do it. I think, corporate accountability is a great idea, but simply reporting the news, is not going to change the way that money flows, the way that investments are made. Right now, the big banks, are heavily invested in fossil fuels, and they might tell you about that, if they're going to be really nice, but this is where the profits are. And right now, they are legally accountable to their shareholders to maximize profits. So we need some change, I think, in the fundamentals of how this system works. We need to stop allowing the foxes to run the chicken coop, and that means in our political system, it means in our economic system, and, across the board.
Thanks. Tax on financial transactions. I actually, that was mentioned in Occupy Wall Street. I actually put a post on it, and boy, did I ever get creamed. I was told that would devastate the economy of Lower Manhattan, that the trading would all go to Hong Kong and Singapore, and it would just be a disaster for Manhattan, Chicago, I don't know where else. What do you have to say to that?
Well, for one thing, I think it's London that has this tax. Hasn't caused them grave problems. New York actually has a financial transaction tax already, but it rebates that tax back to those that are taxed. So essentially it gives it back. But that tax was enforced. We had a financial transaction tax also under JFK. And he basically ended it around 1963 because we had such a positive budget. We had more money, we had a big surplus, it wasn't necessary. Actually, what a transaction tax would do would be to reduce the speculation, the reckless gambling. It would require some thoughtfulness about investments instead of short-term, just go for, the bang on your buck without regard to what people are investing in. And that's not a healthy economy. So we're saying not only would it generate money, and a 0.5% tax would generate about $350 billion is what we've been told, about $350 billion a year for essentially a 50-cent tax on every $100 worth of transactions. So we could quibble about the numbers, but one way or the other, it would produce a lot of revenue, and it would help ramp down the gambling that's been integrated into our economy at great peril to the American public.
Well, given how low interest rates are currently, 50 basis points is an awful lot to trade a bond.
Well, but think of it this way. Think of it as a sales tax. And in fact, 0.5% on a sales tax is really quite modest. And one can say, why is it that Wall Street should get off scot-free and be exempted from the sales tax when everybody else has to pay it? Why do the richest players in town get exempted from the sales tax? Because they're the richest players in town, and they can buy themselves their exemption. So we think this is good for the economy, good for the American people, good for the schools that we need to pay for, that those corporations themselves, that American business benefits from. We need a healthy and educated workforce. We have neither right now, and we're all paying the price for that.
Okay. The next question, actually, the Green Party hasn't addressed this one. Many of my readers are very interested in it though. The parsonage exclusion. Someone who is designated a minister of the gospel is entitled to exclude from income the amount that their congregation pays them for housing, regardless of the size. There is no dollar limit on this. So televangelists and megachurch ministers will exclude hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the other hand, small congregations, it's an important boon to many of them. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is challenging the constitutionality of this provision. And the government has avoided it being a matter in the courts, and they've finally gotten standing. If you were president, would you consider ordering the Justice Department to not defend the constitutionality of the parsonage exclusion, as President Obama did with DOMA?
Let me see if I can parse out your question here.
Sure.
So basically, as president, would I permit the Justice Department to leave the parsonage exemption alone?
Well, right now the
your
Justice
question?
Department is defending it.
They're defending it.
the
I see.
constitutionality,
I see.
just like they were defending the constitutionality of DOMA.
Yes.
Many
Right.
people think that
That's right. It's not constitutional. That's right. Yes, and let me agree. The DOMA, I think, does violate equal protection. And, you know, I try not to shoot from the hip and to actually consider these things before taking a position on them. And I would have to say that I would do that. But at first blush, I would agree with the principle here of separation of church and state, which would seem to say that we should not give special favors to employees of religious institutions. That certainly sounds true.
Okay. Would you if you get the chance, would you ask the other candidates about this, because we haven't been able to get them to weigh in?
I'm not surprised. And have they agreed to sit down and have an hour interview with you yet?
Well, they put out their returns, you see, so I didn't ask.
But I haven't heard any questions about my returns yet. So clearly you want to ask them some other things as well.
Well, I haven't had the chance to look at your returns. I've made up all sorts of stories and theories about what your returns might have in them, but since you're releasing them soon, I'm not going to go there. Although I will ask you this: Governor Romney, actually President Obama uses a local Chicago small firm. Mm-hmm. Governor Romney uses PricewaterhouseCoopers at 125 High Street in Boston. So, who's your candidate for first accountant?
Oh, for first accountant? Well, right now I can tell you it is, what's the program where you do it yourself? It's
TurboTax.
TurboTax, yes.
No kidding.
Yep. No, we do our taxes ourselves. Yeah, the old-fashioned way. We don't get fancy lawyers involved.
TurboTax or by hand?
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess it's not quite the old-fashioned way, but it is a do-it-yourself.
You understand the trouble that Tim Geithner got into with TurboTax?
No, I don't.
Oh yeah, he made a mistake on his return. There was income that was supposed to be subject to self-employment tax, and he made a mistake, and then he was given a very hard time because he didn't pay up for what had been avoided by the statute of limitations. So if you put out 12 years worth of returns and somebody found a mistake that you made in 2002, would you pay the difference even though you weren't required to because of the statute of limitations?
Yes, I would.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just to comment on that, it seems to me that low-income people, have a very heavy burden to pay through the tax system. And low-income people who are paying higher tax rates than higher-income people who can invest their money and get capital gains deductions and so on. So I think it's important to observe the letter of the law.
Frankly, when you're talking about the income tax, it is true that low-income people don't pay much income tax, frankly.
Well, if they're not earning much money, then they don't.
Yes.
And unfortunately, 1 out of every 2 Americans now is in poverty or low income and heading to poverty. So when Mitt Romney says 47% of people are paying no income tax, it includes a lot of elders on extremely limited incomes, and it includes a lot of these 1 out of every 2 Americans who's just hovering at the poverty level.
Back to the Green Party platform here. Now, I blog on taxes, but because of DOMA and some cases about transgendered surgery, I've been following GLPD issues in my blog. The Green Party platform takes a strong stand in favor of access to medical and surgical treatment for assignment or reassignment of gender or sex based on informed consent. How do you address the concerns some women have about transsexuals threatening the sanctity and safety of women-only spaces? I particularly read about this quite a bit on radical feminists, and I'm talking about people who characterize themselves as radical feminists, have a real concern that the transgendered are moving into their spaces and it bothers them. Do you?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a real civil rights conundrum going on there, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. You know, I can't say I've heard it as an issue. I know it's out there. It hasn't come to me. What I hear in the community and out there on the campaign trail are more concerns about transgenders' access to jobs and housing and safety and avoiding, you know, being the targets of gay bashing and, you know, violence, gender violence, and so on. Those are, I think, the really compelling and overarching concerns. On, you know, as far as like who's going to use the women's bathroom, you know, there are a lot of bathrooms now which are one-gender bathrooms and which are private bathrooms. You know, so I think there are many ways to solve this problem.
There are concerns about there are concerns. The fight in the community seems to be the protection for the transgendered can somehow compromise the rights of women to have separate, safe spaces.
Yes. Yeah.
The names I've seen common, it's a bit of a war on the internet. It may be kind of small. It's Kathy Brennan on one hand and Monica Roberts on the other, the names that seem to be coming up. And I'm just wondering if, so you haven't hit that issue.
It hasn't come my way, put it this way. I know that when the president refused to sign the executive order establishing workplace equal rights and equal economic rights, regardless of gender or gender assignment, I heard about that as a very big deal, and I heard from people who wanted to know would I stand up for equal rights, regardless of gender identity. And, you know, yes, of course, and my campaign, I will just add, was the first that I know of, certainly in Massachusetts, to actually stand up for the rights of equal marriage. And this was in 2002, running against Mitt Romney, when the Democratic candidates were just trying to decide whether or not they would support civil unions. My campaign was pushing the envelope on that for equal marriage. You know, I think that's really the focus of the debate here around marriage equality, which still, you know, a majority of Americans do not have access to. Marriage equality, as well as economic security, rights to housing, and really critical economic survival issues that I think are access to health care as well, that I think are very important. As far as working out privacy in the bathroom, I'm sure we can sort that one out.
Well, there was just a recent controversial case about someone in prison who required transgender surgery, and there was a bit of an uproar about that being paid for with taxpayers' money. Now, transgender surgery, if it's medical care, you're a prisoner, it should be paid for?
You know, in my view, this is a decision between a person and their healthcare provider. I think there's all kinds of ways that government can get into your healthcare and into your bedroom, and I think as a rule that's not the business of government, that these are healthcare questions that should best be left to individuals and their healthcare provider.
We're talking specifically about somebody who's in prison. So basically a prisoner should have rights to the care that the doctor says the prisoner needs.
In my view, yes, that people do not lose their humanity when they go into prison, and people go into prison for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's the wrong reason and they don't belong there in the first place. I think we don't strip people of their humanity simply because they have wound up in prison. And, you know, about half the time now, it's because they've been found to be using a recreational drug, which shouldn't be illegal to start with. So yes, I think we preserve humanity. When we ask people to pay a price, they are paying that price by going into prison and losing their freedom. I don't think we have to inflict additional prices on them, like denying them their right to vote when they get out of prison, their right to, be able to hold a job and so on. There's all kinds of discrimination that attaches to a prison system which has become very much part of a racist, failed war on drugs. There are enormous inequities in this prison system, and I think we need to hold them to a minimum and begin some real prison reforms in and of themselves, starting with an end to the war on drugs, treating it as a mental health problem when it is, and a public health problem, not a criminal problem, and legalizing marijuana.
Dr. Stein, I realize I haven't gotten that much into the green of the Green Party. Now, I've noticed that we haven't had as much snow, and my oil bill has been a lot lower. I mean, is this global warming really such a bad thing?
Well, yes, it's true. I mean, in some areas there may be some improvements in climate, but the total impact is pretty devastating. Consider it's now predicted that by 2030, about 100 million people are going to lose their lives in developing countries around the world. Now, even if you were so calloused as to say you don't care outside of this country, which I think would be a very inhuman thing to say, and I wouldn't expect you to say it, but there are some people out there who look at it that way. We pay a price for that. When there is political and social instability around the world, we pay a price for that. But we pay a price right now. In fact, the price of food is actually skyrocketing because we have protracted drought. 60% of the lower U.S. right now, the continental United States, is actually in an extended drought, which is driving food prices up substantially. At the same time, we have record forest fires going on right now. We've seen the highest temperatures ever in these last 12 months that have ever been on record. And all of this is taking place with less than 1 degree centigrade of temperature rise. Right now, we are on track to hit 6 degrees centigrade temperature rise in this century. So this is just a tiny taste of what's to come. And this includes, of course, the more severe storms and flooding and all that we're seeing really all over this country. So we're paying an enormous price. And just to look at the costs of damage to the cities and towns and families and homeowners that have been hit, this is really very serious business. It's not compatible with a sustainable economy when already almost 50 million Americans, 50 million Americans need help with the cost of food, and now we have food going up, the price of food going up because of drought. So this is not what a sustainable future looks like. Fortunately, it is solvable if we get to action right now. And so we're calling for a Green New Deal that would solve two crises at once. The crisis in our economy, because we are not getting out of this high entrenched unemployment. They're bringing some jobs back, but these are low-wage, insecure jobs. The president keeps pointing to General Motors like it's the model for recovery, but you probably know General Motors is great if you're a CEO, but if you're a worker, a new worker coming on, your wages are basically coming in at about half of what they used to pay. This does not make for a livable wage or a secure family life. This is the kinds of jobs that are coming back. This won't work. So we've got an economic emergency. At the same time, we have a climate emergency. The great thing is that we can solve them both in one fell swoop. So we're calling for a New Deal like what helped us out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. This is not just a hypothetical idea. It's not more of the same trickle-down economics, which is really a gush-up economics, a movement of wealth and resources into the hands of the very few. Instead, this is a program that actually works for people. And if I can just quickly add how incredibly unequal this economy is, because there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, as the saying goes. So I want to give some flesh and bones to what our economy means right now. If you had 100 people in the room and you had 100 loaves of bread, say bread represents wealth. Right now, 40 of those loaves of bread go to one person who's already well endowed to start with. One person out of that 100 gets 40 loaves of bread. And the 50 people in that room who have the least to eat to start with, so they're kind of scrawny and borderline sick, those 50 people have one loaf of bread. This is how incredibly extreme economic disparities have become. In this country, 23% of children are growing up in poverty. Among 35 developed nations, we are just barely above the bottom. We're just above Romania. So we can do better than this. We can solve this economic emergency that has given all the goods to those that got, and everybody else is, becoming farther and farther behind. We can fix that, actually, with a program to provide jobs for everyone. We're calling for the creation of 25 million jobs, 16 million directly created, and then the spin-off jobs from reviving economic activity would account for about half as many again. So getting up to 24, 25 million jobs. Jobs that are created in our communities. So the funding is provided at about the cost of the first stimulus package, some 600 or 700 billion. But the advantage is that it pays back, because one of the biggest things making the economy crash was that revenues fell through the floor. When Wall Street's waste, fraud, and abuse caused the economy to crash, revenues fell for the floor. That made debt skyrocket, and the economy's basically gone into gridlock. So it needs to be jump-started. This is a jump-start. The stimulus package of 2009 provided for a lot of tax breaks, but unfortunately tax breaks don't create jobs. So we're talking about direct job creation by the communities who get to decide, not Washington, but the communities decide what kind of jobs they need, and we prioritize jobs in the green economy, clean renewable energy, conservation, weatherizing our homes, businesses, and schools, providing for local sustainable agriculture, as well as public transportation, and clean manufacturing and all that. So during the Second World War, we declared emergency and we converted our car factories into bomber factories. Well, we have another emergency now. It's called a climate emergency and an economic emergency, and we can convert some of our bomber factories, in fact, into wind tower and solar factories, because those prices have come down. They are now competitive with fossil fuels, and we can further bring the price down by helping to jumpstart that piece of the economy, create the jobs that we need. At the same time, we end unemployment and jumpstart the green economy. The advantage of that green economy is that it can put a halt to climate change at the same time that it makes wars for oil obsolete. So I know what question you want to ask me, and that is, how can we afford this? So the answer to that is, right now, we are squandering trillions of dollars on wars for oil we don't need, tax breaks for the wealthy that they don't deserve, and massive Wall Street bailouts to the tune of many trillions. So by redirecting those dollars actually here at home, and that includes cutting the military down to year 2000 levels, bringing hundreds of billions of dollars back into our economy, by creating a tax on the Wall Street transactions and capital gains as income and a progressive income tax, we have all the money we need to put into real security.
I wasn't going to ask you
home.
about this, but since you brought it up,
Okay.
I am concerned. The one thing that really worries me about the Green Platform is I have a question as to whether the United States surrendering air and naval supremacy would make for a safer world. And I suspect it might not.
So let me answer that. Number one, if we were to cut the military budget in half, we're back to year 2000 levels. We still had military, air, and naval supremacy back in 2000. Have we doubled our security by doubling our military? I don't think so. And what we're seeing right now, this enormous blowback throughout the Middle East, where our soldiers trying to train Afghanis are getting shot up. We cannot turn the war effort over to them because, they are not considering themselves our allies. Pakistan does not consider themselves our allies. Why is that? 70% of people identify the U.S. as an enemy because we've been dropping bombs through these drone wars, which have enormously high civilian casualties. So we need to, this doesn't mean we never use military force, but it means we use it as the last resort, that we are not the policemen of the world, that we are not busy dropping bombs on weddings and funerals, which unfortunately is what the drone wars are doing, that instead, and we don't spread our bases all around the world to be the world's policemen. This excessive knee-jerk militarism has gotten us into an enormous amount of trouble. We need to put our dollars where they really make us secure, that is by having a secure economy, by having jobs here, and by putting an end to climate change, which is an incredible threat to security world over. And when we cut the budget, the military, the bloated military industrial security budget, down to 50%, we are still then spending 3 times as much as the next biggest spender around the world. So this doesn't mean China, actually. And we'd be still far ahead of the Soviet Union.
They don't pay their soldiers quite as much as we pay our soldiers, though, do they?
You know, the cost of living is a lot lower there. What can I say?
Well, what I mean is we, in order for us to have as big an army as they do, we'd have to spend a lot more, I would think.
Well, you know, in this day and age, we're not fighting ground wars where it's a head count on your troop levels. You know, for better and for worse, it has a whole lot more to do with other things. But the main thing is we don't want to be looking at war as our first line of defense. Our first line of defense needs to be international law and human rights. And without that, you know, all the army in the world isn't going to do us any good. We have all the army in the world right now, and it's making us more insecure, not more secure. So that's how we get out of this alive. And you know, bottom line here is that the Green New Deal is a win for jobs, a win for the economy, a win for climate, and a win for peace abroad. It's also good for our health because what did your mother always tell you? You need to eat your fresh fruits and vegetables and get your exercise. The Green New Deal actually permits you to have an active transportation system and to be eating healthy, local food with a strong component of a plant-based diet. 75% of our healthcare expenditures are actually spent taking care of chronic disease.
Actually, there is a tax question that I missed asking you. The Green Party is proposing a tax on junk food and soda pop and that type of stuff. That was one of the things I noticed in the platform. And I'm just concerned if that's going to include Mountain Dew.
I don't know, and you know, in my view, it's a controversial matter. Personally, I think there are better ways to get to a healthy diet. I think we need to shift our subsidies, which right now go to junk food, go to highly processed food and high-calorie food. I think we need fundamental reforms in our food bill so that we are shifting our subsidies from food that makes us sick to the fresh fruits and vegetables and sustainable food systems that we need nearby. Right now we've got food deserts, so it's no wonder that people are buying the only cheap food that they can get their hands on. We need to make healthy local food a priority, ensure that it's getting served in our schools and so on. You know, the diet changed world over, and you can look at Greece and Crete as recent examples where agribusiness came in, they started advertising to kids, and they changed what were very healthy, wonderful, delicious diets that produced some of the most incredible public health statistics anywhere to be found. Far better survival and health levels, reduced infant mortality, reduced rates of cancer and heart disease and all that because they had a healthy diet. When agribusiness came in and started advertising to kids, guess what? The kids started getting sick with obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure and elevated cholesterol and all that. So we've got a better way out of this. Right now we've got a sick care system. We're going bankrupt paying for it. The pharmaceutical and insurance companies are making out like bandits by shifting our dollars from wars, Wall Street, and tax breaks for the wealthy to the things that we need here at home. A Green New Deal, we can create a healthy food system, a transportation system that lets you get some exercise on your way to work, and we can actually get our health back into our hands and cut the cost of health care enormously.
Are you like trying to act as the nation's doctor here in a way?
Well, thank you for asking that question because I'm often asked what kind of medicine I'm practicing now, and I say I'm practicing political medicine because it's the mother of all illnesses. And if we're going to fix the other things that ail us, and I just don't mean just heart disease and obesity and diabetes and Alzheimer's and all that, you know, them too, but if we're going to fix the fundamental illness of our political system, of our healthcare system, our education system, make public higher education free, end student debt, provide jobs for everyone, healthcare is a human right, downsize the military. These are solutions that are all within our reach. We got to fix the broken political system. People can do that, whether we win the office or we simply win the day by advancing these solutions. We can achieve that in the voting booth on November 6th. I encourage people to go to my website and join the team at jillstein.org.
Back to the Green Party platform. The Green Party platform states that freedom of speech should not be used to perpetuate oppression and abuse. So does the Green Party wish to establish some sort of agency which would allow the prosecution of statements that are considered to be hate speech or something along those lines? Or what are they talking about there?
What does that mean? Yeah, I mean, that's a very fine line. Yeah. So, where do you draw the line? I'm not sure, but I think there's a difference between declaring something illegal and acknowledging that there's demagoguery. And I think it's really important for our elected officials to be able to stand up and say that hate speech is not okay. It's just not good, and there are real consequences from it. We've seen so many gun shootings lately that are in part inflamed by hate speech that we see from elected officials, from appointees, from some public news and press outlets. So I think it's very important as elected officials to stand up and identify hate speech for what it is, and to clarify that the victims of that hate speech, are wrongly victimized. It's not immigrants or people of color who have caused the economy to crash. This was a problem of waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street, and that those who are fomenting this hate speech, are demagogues and have done us a real disservice.
Okay. Now, I'm sure that you've contemplated this one deeply. Again, this is on the Green Party platform. But the Green Party platform also calls for an end to official support for any remaining symbols of slavery. Specifically, it calls for the removal of the Confederate battle flag from all government buildings. Now, we are currently commemorating the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, a topic of deep personal interest to me as an amateur historian who specializes in pre-Civil War issues such as the life of Margaret Fuller and the abolitionist movement. Despite the Confederacy's embrace of slavery, many Americans cherish the memory of Civil War ancestors who fought for the Confederacy. Would you be proposing the National Park Service not honor Confederate veterans in the sesquicentennial if they're depicting the Confederate flag?
Well, let me pose a related question to you. How would you feel about the Nazi swastika, being used as part of a national celebration to commemorate, German culture and German history? I think people would find that deeply offensive and really disturbing. I think it's no less disturbing to celebrate a symbol that's inherently representative of slavery and the Holocaust that represented. So, yes, personally, I find this not okay and deeply troubling.
Okay, so I was at Antietam on September 17th for the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Antietam, and we spent the day there. At the end of the day, members of the public went up and, in succession, read the names of all, and it must have been men, although who knows, there might have been a woman who slipped in, but all the men who died that day, fighting for what they believed it was right, and
Yes.
we read them in order by state in alphabetical order. So,
Yes.
in your view, should we not have read the Confederates?
I wouldn't say that at all, and I think that's a very different question from celebrating symbols that are associated with slavery. I think to commemorate, all the ambiguities of war and the disasters on both sides of a battlefield, of a battle line, I think is an appropriate and human thing to do. Yes, absolutely. I think what people find objectionable is the symbol that is dissociated from our humanity, that represents, a culture built on slavery, I think you really can't separate the Confederate flag from the enormous tragedy and criminal Holocaust associated with slavery.
Which brings us to the next question, also on the platform, okay? The Green Party supports the creation of a claim of action and a right to recover inherited wealth and other profits accumulated from the slave trade for the benefits of a reparations trust fund. Now, the slave trade was made illegal over 200 years ago. Slavery was abolished about 150 years ago as the result of a war that devastated the economy of the South. Is there really that much inherited wealth to go seize? I mean, maybe we're talking about going to your alma mater and taking 20% of their endowment, but other than that, where's the inherited wealth to grab for this reparations fund?
As a consequence, in other words, inherited wealth that was accumulated through the slave trade and then passed down.
Right. I'd like the forensic accounting job to trace that through, to find this prominent New England family and say, 10% of your net worth we can attribute to the slave trade. How's that happen? How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, again, I'd have to say that, in broad theory, that reparations, I think, are legitimate. As to exactly how you do it, I'm not prepared to say on the fly, and I admit that this is not a lead issue in our campaign. We're calling for racial justice now and for economic justice now. And I think that is kind of foremost on the minds of most people out there who really want to see jobs. And as you're probably well aware that the average African American family coming into this millennium had about 10 cents on the dollar of an average Caucasian family. 10 cents on a dollar. That's a pretty staggering figure. And what's happened over the past 6 years since the Wall Street crash is that 10 cents on the dollar has declined to 5 cents on the dollar. So people of color are really taking it on the chin right now in the inequities happening right now. And I think before we move on to reparations, we can start from right where we are right now by going a long way, by providing jobs, by providing quality education, including public higher education for those who want to go on to have a degree, by providing health care as a human right through Medicare for All. And all of these investments fundamentally pay for themselves. They are investments that essentially return the investment many times over, particularly for health care as a human right through Medicare for All and through education. So that's where I would start, by establishing reparations right now in the 21st century for the enormous inequities that people of color are carrying. Not to mention also the foreclosure crisis, which has targeted, predatory lending, targeted communities of color, targeted the elderly, and has absolutely devastated those communities. So these are problems that we can fix right now. As much as I appreciate the more esoteric questions, they are interesting, and I wouldn't say they're not important either.
Well, they're coming from your platform. I mean, we haven't gotten into Hawaiian independence and Puerto Rican independence yet, but.
And again, this is the platform. It's not our
right.
campaign.
Okay. Now, there are some questions that are asked the presidential candidates that we just haven't found out about you. For example, it's Dr. Richard Rohrer, right? He's a transplant surgeon. You're married to? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, will he have to give up his career as a transplant surgeon to take over his duties as first gentleman?
We haven't actually come to the point of having to discuss that yet, but that's a very interesting question, and we'll see if I could persuade him.
Okay. Will there be a first dog?
Absolutely. Yes, there's definitely a first dog. Her name is Bandita, and she is a 150-pound Great Dane. She is white with a couple of big black spots over her eyes. It looks like she has a bandit mask. That's why she's called Bandita.
And when you load up the car, does she ride inside or on top of the car?
She rides in the back seat, usually.
Well, that seems to be the more presidential way the more presidential way of doing things.
I don't think she would allow me to put her up on top of the.
Now your sons. I'm sorry. You have two sons, correct?
Yes.
It's Noah and
Ben. Yeah.
And Ben. How are they dealing with all this? Having mom run for president.
They're actually kind of used to it because mom has been fighting the battle for 10 years, I'd say, helping to build an alternative political voice for 10 years. So they just kind of take it in stride right now. President seemed like, oh my God, at first, and then they kind of found out it really wasn't much different from how life normally is in our house. And they're not in the house now as well, so that makes things easier.
Yeah. What really, one of the things that really intrigues me is among my Jewish friends, and I worked in public accounting in Worcester, Massachusetts, and some of the top Jewish firms, frankly, there doesn't seem to be a lot of excitement about your candidacy. I get, who's Jill Stein? Is there any explanation for that, or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the system is designed to keep an alternative campaign very busy just trying to get on the ballot. So for 10 months, we've essentially focused all of our resources and staff on getting on the ballot. Now that we're about 6 weeks out and we're on the ballot for 85% of voters who can actually walk into the voting booth, and they do not have to simply pull the lever for one of two corporate-sponsored candidates brought to you by Wall Street and basically give Wall Street a mandate for 4 more years of the same. 85% of voters will actually have a real alternative that they can go and vote for. But that means that this system leaves us by design, and it leaves voters by design not knowing who their choices are. We think that public debates ought to be open to candidates who have done the work, who have the organization and the funding to have gotten on the ballot in enough states that they could actually win the election. We have met that criteria. That's what the League of Women Voters used, while our debates were actually controlled by a public interest organization as opposed to by a private corporation, which is what runs them now. Private corporation, more or less governed by the Democratic and Republican parties, whose purpose is to silence alternatives and to lock people in this box. Yet 90 million voters are going to be staying home in this election. 90 million voters, according to USA Today 2 weeks ago, 90 million voters are staying home because they believe that Barack Obama, who now has quite a track record, and the talk has been very different from the walk. There are a lot of people who've been experiencing what that walk means, sending our jobs overseas, making the costs of health care and education continue to skyrocket, and student loan debt go skyrocketing, undermining wages here at home, et cetera.
You're proposing, there's resistance to the idea of bankruptcy protection. You're proposing total forgiveness for student loans, aren't you?
Exactly. Here we are bailing out the big banks. This is our third quantitative easing, and there is no end in sight. This is $40 billion a month. It's predicted it could easily be upwards towards $2 trillion again after $4.5 trillion in monies dispersed, according to Bloomberg News. $4.5 trillion already handed out, and another $16 trillion in basically zero interest loans, which also costs us as taxpayers and in many other ways. So instead of bailing out banks, for the gazillionth time, how about we bail out the students who were the victims of that waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street? And instead of bailing out the banks, we start to break up the banks and hold them accountable and give them their day in court for that waste, fraud, and abuse that Congress actually said there was good reason to send them to court to find out more about.
To shift just a bit, I really would like to hear more about your biography, about your parents, about your grandparents. Can you give us a little more family history? Because
sure.
Your father was your father was a lawyer, your mother was a homemaker. What else can you tell us about them?
They were wonderful people, and they were growing up in an age when a one-income family could actually support a household. And I was fortunate to be, in a suburb that put a lot into its public schools. And I received a terrific education, as did my whole family and just about everybody who grew up in Highland Park, Illinois. And, I think every family should have that opportunity, should be supportable by a one working parent family, and actually have a first-class education and the opportunity to go on and have a higher education too. So yeah, I had all those advantages of the 1950s. And my parents were both second generation. Their parents had been immigrants, had come here fleeing the pogroms, the essentially persecution of Jews in Poland and in Russia that was conscripting young boys at age 6, 7, and 8 into the army. So my grandparents were brought over as kids in order to save them from going to war in the Russian army in the very early 1900s. And, I was just very fortunate to be a part of that generation.
How did they make their way?
Man, so my grandfather, never went to grade school. He was delivering newspapers and then went into business for himself and worked his way up. My father's...
What was his name?
Israel Wool.
Israel Wool.
Israel Wool, who was a very observant Jew, was an Orthodox Jew. And, I grew up sort of seeing what he did, seeing what my parents did.
What type of business was he in?
He owned property, basically. And early on, my family lived in a building that he owned, and the whole extended family lived there. And he went on to do his investments, and then investments became his thing. My father's family likewise had come over. They both settled in Chicago. And then my father's family went on to move out to L.A. because my paternal grandfather was a tailor. He made clothes, and eventually he had a clothing factory. Unlike my mother's father, who was not friendly to the labor movement, my father's father was very friendly to the labor movement and really took it to heart and took his workers' welfare as extremely important. So these are the myths that get passed down.
What was his name?
His name was Abe Stein.
Okay,
Abe and Lil.
And he had a factory, or?
He had a factory, but then he had a factory in Chicago, and he went to Los Angeles because he got a job in Hollywood, I'm told, designing costumes. So I would love to find a movie that had a credit for him somewhere. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. That part of the family lore just got lost.
I really appreciated it because I was this, she graduated from Harvard in 1973. It was driving me crazy.
Well, there you have it.
Well, Dr. Stein, I really appreciate you coming, and I wish you luck in your campaign. And I know my young cousin Ellen, the occupier in Naples, is going to vote for you, and I may well too. Thank you very much.
And I would only add that there are 36 million current college students and recent graduates who are effectively indentured servants. If word gets out to them alone, that alone could actually turn this election on its head and could actually make our own Tahrir Square happen right here in the US of A. It took them 3 weeks to basically overcome an entrenched military dictatorship. Imagine what we can do in the 6 weeks between now and then. I encourage people to go to my website, jillstein.org, get on Facebook, which is Jill Stein, go on Twitter, @JillStein2012, and the sky's the limit. Our futures is ours to take into our own hands.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Doctor.
so much. Great talking with you.
Bye-bye.